thank you all for being here. If you would be so kind, please raise your hand in the participant window to indicate you can hear me. And yes, all those hands went up. Okay, thank you very much. That's good news. Jill, welcome. Mary, welcome. Amy, thank you very much for joining us before you take off. Devons, thank you so much for being here with us. Asia, nice to see you again. Janak, very nice to see you. Jessica, thank you for being here. Jess, hi again. Jessica Thomas, thank you. Jill, nice to see you here. Christina, thank you very much. Neil Manova, thank you so much for being here. Richard and Susan, I think I've got all of you. And now I'm going to ask those of you who were on just before I actually started up the camera, if you could hear the music playing, would you please raise your hand? Ah, okay, very reassuring. Okay, got it. Thank you all very, very much for your enthusiastic participation. One more time, you are seeing me on video, yes? Yeah. Okay, very good, very good, very good. Thank you so much. I'm gonna lower all your hands because I can do that. All righty. The music that I was playing just before we began plays a role in our proceedings for this evening. So let me get back to sharing my screen with you and plunging right ahead. So this time I'll actually show the housekeeping screen as I go through our housekeeping list. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, you can adjust your audio settings up in the upper right-hand corner. Your mic and video camera are not necessary because they are automatically off simply by virtue of how we do things in the webinar. You notice that you can raise your hand, and I will be looking for your raised hands. You can also simply type a question into the Q&A box. Please, Amy, please do me the favor of typing a question into the Q&A box. Wrong answer. Put your hand down just to let me know that you can see the Q&A box. And all right, if you can't see the Q&A box, raise your hand. I know you can raise your hand, but if you can see the Q&A, if you cannot see the Q&A box, I just want to make sure that our Q&A function is functioning. Yay, finally, hello. All right, thank you very much. All right, on with the show. Last week, tonight, chapter 1, part 2, Arjuna's despair. What we discussed were Arjuna's reasons for not wanting to fight. We looked at sin and karma. Sin is, of course, a very loaded word, and how the Bhagavad-gita defines sin and how we are accustomed to hearing it in Western theology, Western religion is a little bit different as it pertains now to karma, not just a state you're born into and a one-shot opportunity not to do it, lest eternal damnation be your future. And we spoke a little bit about the cause of Arjuna's despair. He didn't have an affair. But we will talk about affairs eventually. Tonight, our program. Gita Showstoppers. Rather than moving ahead into the second chapter, which we are going to do next week, I wanted to address some of the issues that come up in the first chapter that just give people a reason to put the book down and not pick it back up again. One point of confusion is the social order of Arjuna's world, which is not immediately clear in the first chapter, and depending on the nature of the translation, becomes even less clear when Arjuna begins to state his reasons for not wanting to fight. So I want to look at a few different translations and explain a little bit about the social order of Arjuna's world, so we have some context and we understand the frame of reference that Arjuna is finding himself in when he confronts this problem of this battle. So what is his social frame of reference? The depiction of women and the assumption of a patriarchal orientation to the Bhagavad-gita. This comes up in yoga wisdom texts in general, not just the Bhagavad-gita. Now, I also spoke about detachment from family affection and how that is also seen as a problem for Arjuna, but we're going to gray that one out for tonight because I'd rather go deep into these other two topics and use detachment from family affection as a segue into what we do next week. So once again, that'll be a cliffhanger, a nail biter, something to keep you coming back. Did you know that if your head was cut off, you would die? Raise your hands if you knew this. Okay, good. All right, that's very, very reassuring. Okay, thank you very much. You can lower all your hands now. Yes, it's true. In case there was any doubt, if your head gets cut off, then your body will cease to function. Now, if due to some unfortunate circumstance, you were to lose your foot or your leg or your arm, or you had surgery and some part of your insides had to be removed, like your spleen or your appendix, and nobody really knows what that does anyway, you would not necessarily die. But if your head gets cut off, show's over, folks. We generally have an aversion to hierarchies in modern life. We don't like to think that one thing is more important than the other, or one person is more important than the other, or one group of people is more important than another group of people. Our bodies are hierarchical. The head is actually the most important part. You can't live without it. Whereas there are other parts, we want to have them all, and we take care of all of them, but they're not all the same, and they're not all of equal importance in a life and death situation. So our bodies are both hierarchical and egalitarian at the same time. And so is the Vedic social order. So the Vedic social order consists of 4 stages of life that are integrated into 4 social divisions. And this is called VARNA and ASHRAMA, otherwise known as the VARNA-ASHRAM system. And this is the social system that's in play in the Bhagavad-gita. The stages of life are based on how old are you? And the social divisions are based on a combination of your natural aptitude and the kind of work that you are attracted to doing. It's not based on birth, which is to say there's social mobility based on what kind of person you happen to be. I'll get into this as we move along. So let's move along. So for starters, the Varna and Ashram system has an intention, just like anything else in yoga. This is the social organization of yoga. Yoga has a socioeconomic function. And that function, or that purpose, is the progressive spiritual advancement for each individual member of society and for society as a whole. So there's a balance here, just as our purpose in the yoga of the Bhagavad-gita is to harmonize our conditional nature with our constitutional nature. Similarly, a harmony between the individual person and the society as a whole is what is sought in the Varnashram system. A person acts according to their nature and also at the same time considers how their actions contribute to the spiritual upliftment of society at large. So we'll go through this. 4 social orders. Brahmins. The technical spelling would be brahmanas. Most often you will find this spelled with an I, Brahmin. Same thing. Those who know Brahman, those who are acquainted with spiritual teachings. So spiritually enlightened intellectuals would be the Brahmins. Then the Kshatriyas. Kshatriyas are those whose natural aptitude and work they're attracted to would have them engaged in governance and defense. So your administrative class, your military class would be the Kshatriyas. The Vaishyas are your business people, entrepreneurs who are in charge of agriculture and commerce. And the Shudras, artisans, artists, and laborers, people who are accustomed to or inclined to work with their hands. So the performing arts, people who are good at crafts, people who build bridges and houses and buildings. That's the group known as Shudra. All 4 of these are essential for a complete society. The 4 life stages are brahmachari or brahmacharini, if you are a lady. And the brahmacharini ashram is actually a very recent innovation. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later when we speak about the role of women in the society. So a student, from your first year to your 25th year, you are expected to be dedicated to the art and science of learning. The natural progression, or at least the natural expectation, there are exceptions to every single one of these rules, is grihastha, or householder, from age 25 to 50. That is when you are making a home for yourself and having a family, that sort of thing. Vanaprastha, retired. Let's go on the assumption that by around 50 or so, your children are grown enough to be independent. You start to wind down your affairs in the world, and you go on vacation to places of spiritual pilgrimage in order to focus on your spiritual life, because up until now, you've been spending the last 25 years busy with your family life. And then the last stage, sannyas, or renounce. Now that gets an asterisk because technically sannyas means someone who leaves their family, wanders off, and walks from village to village and depends completely on the Supreme Person for their maintenance, and they collect donations from grihasthas when they come into town and teach transcendental knowledge, and they don't stay, they have no home. So men, as a general rule in this system, will take sannyas, whereas ladies, rather than going on the road and teaching, will usually live with their adult children and be the wise grandmother at home. They teach families, they teach the community, the village, basically. They stay in the one village and provide spiritual wisdom for the one village, whereas the man wanders off, toddles off into the sunset and goes from village to village. So that's strictly how that works. And like I said, there are always exceptions. So here's how the Varnas and ashrams are integrated. The Brahmins go through all 4 ashrams. And they go from student all the way to sannyas, because they are the ones who are, first of all, presumably the most renounced, the most detached from material life. And they are the spiritually enlightened intellectuals. They have the most spiritual knowledge. So that's their job. That's their contribution to society. The Kshatriyas go from student life to retired life. They're not really expected to take sannyas, but they will retire and hang out with the sannyasis. Now, student life in each of these two categories is not necessarily the same. There's equal access to education, but the nature of your education depends on your Varna, the natural inclination that you have in terms of work and aptitude. So a Brahmin, as a student, will be studying transcendental knowledge. A Kshatriya, as a student, will be studying martial arts nested into the ethics and morality of transcendental knowledge. A little different, because Brahmins don't have to learn how to fight, and Kshatriyas do. Warrior class, Klingon, basically. The Vaishyas are also students in the beginning, and they learn the art of taking care of agriculture and commerce, because that's what they do. And that is also nested in the broader picture of the ethics and values of a spiritual culture. But they don't specialize in the same kind of martial arts that the Kshatriyas would specialize in, nor would they specialize in the kind of spiritual wisdom that the Brahmins would specialize in. Now, Vaishyas also take it up to retirement. After all, you want to stop working at some point. But they're not expected to go quite as far into the spiritual aspect of retirement as the Kshatriyas. They're expected to actually have a greater attachment to material life and the comforts that one acquires in the course of, presumably, hopefully, being a successful business person. The Shudras are also students, and their education is primary vocational. Almost by definition, a Shudra is someone who doesn't really have much of an interest in spiritual life and transcendental knowledge. So not much aptitude or particularly inclination. So Shudras will study their craft, will get vocational training in whatever is their particular area of specialization within their Varna. So this system of education is an equal opportunity kind of education, but it doesn't mean it's the same for everyone, because everyone is understood to be different. So you get the kind of education and the facility for the kind of lifestyle for which you're well suited. Going into this in a little bit more detail. So the spiritually enlightened intellectuals, the Brahmins, are the head of the social body. You can't live without them. They're the teachers. They're the eyes and ears. They have spiritual vision. They hear spiritual sound, and they speak spiritual sound. And they're the ones who really give direction to the whole rest of the society in order to fulfill the mission of the society, which is the progressive spiritual advancement of everyone in that society. Their operating system, they are self-governing. They're anarchists. They don't need anyone else to tell them what to do, and they figure things out on their own. And their renunciation is that the men teach society, as I said before, and women teach the family. So there's a division of labor. Each have to be, of course, very well versed in transcendental knowledge and be able to teach the proper application of changeable principles according to time, place, and circumstance, teach changeless principles in accordance with time, place, and circumstance. So to know the difference between an unchanging principle and a changeable principle. The Kshatriyas, governance and defense, they're the arms of the social body. So they protect the social body. Their operating system is monarchy. And they will, when there's a contest of arms to decide who's going to rule what, you know, maybe there'll be a fight of some kind. But for the most part, whoever is the strongest king is in charge, and then you've got sub-kings and sub-kings and such like that. But that's basically how it works. In retirement, they seek out places of pilgrimage. They go to places of pilgrimage for their purification, develop detachment. When you were the ruling class, you know, you're used to a lot of opulence and everybody doing what you tell them. And for spiritual advancement, you got to get over your ego and your attachment to your material comforts. And so they seek spiritual knowledge by giving up the throne or giving up whatever princely government duties that they have before they get very, very old. So in the Vedic social system, Nancy Pelosi is already gone. Vaishyas, agriculture and commerce group, the entrepreneurs, they're the belly, the midsection. They're the organs that distribute the wealth to the rest of the society. They're the heartbeat, the belly that feeds everyone. So just as heart, lungs, belly distribute all the necessary nutrients and essential energy forces all around the body, that's what the Vaishyas do. Their operating system is capitalism. Now notice how capitalism is confined just to this group. It's not the overarching ideology of the whole society. The Vaishyas operate amongst themselves in a capitalist system, but it's not what runs the whole show. And their retirement is meant to do the same thing as the Kshatriyas, if they take it that far. And then finally, the Shudras, they're the legs. They make everything go. They support the whole rest of the social body. Their operating system is socialism, collective bargaining, that kind of thing. So you can see how the whole body is necessary in order to have a healthy society. Everybody matters. Every portion of the social body is important in order to make the whole thing work as a complete synergistic whole. But the head's still the most important. Otherwise, you can't see where you're going. All right, so this brings us to Gita Showstopper number 1, which is Western culture, ethics and morality, and Vedic culture's ethics and morality do not share the same sociological frame of reference. I've got some charts that will show you how that is. The problem is that we look at Vedic culture and the Vedic social system through the lens of our own social system, and then it doesn't make sense to us. So hopefully this will help clear that up a little bit. All right. So here are the two systems side by side. In our American social division, or Western social division, position is determined by wealth and ethnicity. So your capitalists are all the way on the top. They control everything. The upper, lower, middle class folks are right below them. Then you have your working class, working poor, and underclass. Compare this now to the Vedic social system, where your position is not determined by wealth and ethnicity. It's determined by qualities and aptitude. And the values are very, very different. Capitalists are the Vaishyas. So while they're on top in the Western system, they're actually on the third level down from the top in the Vedic system. The upper, middle, lower classes in the Vedic system are going to be spread out amongst the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Shudras. The working class, which is 3 rungs down on the Western pyramid, is actually supposed to be at the top of, which is to say that your teachers are usually here in the working class. We don't pay them very much, but they're supposed to be taken care of by the rest of the society so they can lead the society. Working class people also tend to join the military. You do have upper class people in the higher ranks of the military, but the bulk of your military now is working class people. or even working poor people looking to do something that will give them some economic security. Working poor is pretty much the Shudra and underclass, the people who provide the lowest level of services for the least amount of money. The Western system assumes a universal ethics and morality, which is to say that everyone is supposed to be held to the same standard. And of course, it doesn't work because whoever has the most privilege actually can bend the system to their favor. In the Vedic system, on the other hand, you have the assumption of very specific ethics and morality, which is to say that each Varna has a slightly different set of ethics and morality they're obliged to honor. Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad-gita, is above the whole thing. As we'll find out later in the Gita, the Vedic social system is something that he will take credit for providing. It's his invention. And even though he appears in the Kshatriya and Vaishya categories, by his appearance, he appears in a Kshatriya family. But due to some of the intrigues that we hear about in the Mahabharata, he is carried off and is raised in a Vaishya family, and all of his childhood pastimes take place in a rural agrarian environment as a cowherd boy. He is the adopted son of the king and queen of the cowherds. So even though he appears to be operating in these two areas on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, he's a prince, he's a Kshatriya, even though he's not fighting. But that's his birthright. Everyone knows him as a prince. And yet, Krishna, as the source of this system, is transcendental to it. One example is coming up in just a moment. The takeaway here is that, well, two takeaways. One, the Vedic system is not the caste system. Even though it uses the same names, it's not the same thing. The caste system is a relatively modern, degraded perversion of the original system of Varnas. It's based solely on birth rather than on your work and natural aptitude. It's characterized by a very class-conscious mentality, and due to the corruption of the system, the lower divisions are exploited by the higher divisions. So this is just a dissonant, the caste system is just a dissonant echo of the system of Varnas and Ashrama that we see as the social context for the Bhagavad-gita. And those two things shouldn't be confused. Now, the second takeaway is that even though the Western system currently does not recognize, is not institutionally designed to support this natural division, we can see in any culture, in any society, you have people who are naturally inclined towards intellectualism and spirituality. You have people who are naturally inclined towards power, leadership. You have people who are naturally inclined towards commerce and agriculture. You have people who are naturally inclined towards manual labor and support and art and things like that. So the conformance, the institutional system of Varna and Ashram is a recognition of these natural propensities that human beings have. And it offers the potential for balance in human society in harmony with cosmic order and a reasonable, peaceful coexistence for everyone. And that's what Arjuna is afraid of losing. He sees this system crumbling if the Kshatriyas, all the leaders of the government administrators, the chivalrous warriors on the battlefield, if they're all killed, then the pyramid will collapse. So that's what he's concerned about. Now, Krishna, as I said before, is transcendental to the whole thing, and he occupies the position of the Supreme Person. And there was one particular instance prior to the speaking of the Bhagavad-gita that is actually very important in the setup and in the understanding of both Krishna's position and the position of women in the Vedic society. This is Draupadi. Draupadi is the wife of the Pandavas, all five. She has 5 husbands. Now, originally, her idea was that she wanted to marry Arjuna. And Arjuna won the contest that was arranged for him to compete against the other princes. The contest was devised in such a way so that actually he was the only one who was qualified to win. So this was Draupadi's idea. And I'll explain later how it is she actually ended up married to all 5 of the Pandavas. What's happening here, however, is the event that is pivotal to setting off the Battle of Kurukshetra. As we covered in our earlier webinars, we have 2 sides to this battle. The sons of Dhritarashtra, led by Duryodhana, and the Pandavas, Arjuna and his brothers. And Duryodhana is doing everything he can possibly do to cheat the Pandavas out of their rightful inheritance, namely the kingdom. And so he arranges for a gambling match with loaded dice. Now, Kshatriyas are obliged to accept gambling challenges. And so Yudhisthira, the oldest of the Pandava brothers, accepts this gambling challenge. But because the game is rigged, he loses and loses and loses. There are episodes in the Mahabharata where somehow or other common sense just does not prevail. This is one of them. I don't have much of an explanation for this other than that Krishna wanted the battle to be fought and therefore common sense did not prevail. Yudhisthira gambles away all of the Pandavas' property and all the Pandavas themselves. He gives up, he actually loses his whole family, including their wife, Draupadi. She, of course, knows nothing about any of this, and she's certainly not party to it. So when the gambling match is finished, Dushana, Duryodhana's brother, who does not play a role in the Bhagavad-gita, finds Draupadi and drags her into the assembly hall by her hair. And now Draupadi is a very powerful woman. She is characterized in the Mahabharata as an extremely powerful person, no slouch. She's Kshatriya princess. And she's dragged into the assembly where all of the leading people, the leaders of the society are assembled. Duryodhana informs her that she has been lost in a gambling match and now belongs to him and indicates that she should sit on his lap. Draupadi tells him where he can put his lap. So Duryodhana, angry and insulted, attempts to disrobe her in the middle of the assembly. And she fights, of course. She tries to fight him, but he's a big, strong warrior, and she's a woman who is not as physically strong. So she's holding on to her dress with both hands and losing, and then holding on with one hand. Now, Draupadi has a very special, close relationship with Krishna, and she knows who Krishna is. Not everyone understands that Krishna is the supreme being, but Draupadi knows. So seeing that her only chance of retaining her honor in this situation is to get help from Krishna, she puts up both hands and chants this mantra, Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Nata Narayan Na Vasudeva. And as soon as she chants this mantra, Krishna, from wherever he happens to be, known as Yogeshvara, the Ishvara of yoga, the master of mystic yoga, supplies Draupadi with an infinite amount of cloth. And no matter how long Duryodhana keeps pulling on her clothes, there's always more. And he never succeeds in removing her clothes from her. So this mantra, we'll take a moment to look at this mantra. This is Draupadi's mantra, and this was the mantra that was playing, the music that was playing before we began this evening. So Shri literally means auspicious. It's an honorific that indicates the presence of the goddess of fortune, who is always with Lord Vishnu. Her bija mantra is Shrim. And Krishna is Krishna, who is also Vishnu himself. Govinda is a name of Krishna in his youth, indicating the cowherd boy, the lord of the cows. Hare can be understood a couple of different ways. The vocative form of Hari, which is a name of Vishnu, also sometimes Hare interpreted as a name of Radha, the feminine aspect, Krishna's girlfriend. Murari, Krishna is the killer of a demon named Mura, and now Draupadi is being assaulted by these demonic men. Hey, as in, hey, pay attention to me. Nata means Lord. It's a word that means Lord of. Narayan is means the preserver of the universe. And Vasudev means the son of Vasudev. So Vasudev is Krishna's Kshatriya father. So that's the meaning of this mantra. So Duryodhana eventually gives up. And Draupadi is mad, real mad, like seriously, seriously mad. And she swears that on account of this insult, not only from Duryodhana, but also other members of the royal family who did not step up when they should have and said, hey, wait a minute, this is wrong. She says she will not wash her hair until she can rinse it in the blood of Duryodhana and his brother. Draupadi is the one who declares war on the Kauravas. She doesn't consult with her husbands. She doesn't say, hey, would you mind doing this for me? As you can see in the picture, they're actually quite embarrassed about the whole thing. No, she's the one. The Kurukshetra war is fought primarily on account of this last insult. And it is Draupadi who says, you're going to die, all of you, and I'm going to wash my hair in your blood. That's pretty badass. Which brings us to showstopper number 2, the depiction and social position of women in the Bhagavad-gita. So let's return to Bhagavad-gita verses 40-41, and in some versions this will be 41-42. The division of the verses changes depending on which edition of the Gita you have. Now, this particular translation of these two verses comes from Winthrop Sargent. Because of the ascendancy of lawlessness, Krishna, the family women are corrupted. When women are corrupted, O Krishna, the intermixture of caste is born. From intermixture brings to hell the family destroyers and the family too. The ancestors of these indeed fall, deprived of offerings of rice and water. So remember now, this is Arjuna speaking to Krishna, explaining to him why he sees nothing but misfortune to come from this battle, regardless of the outcome. If he wins, he loses. If he loses, he loses. If he does nothing, he loses. Everything is bad. Nothing is good. So Sargent's translation is kind of like a showstopper trifecta, because you get women who descend into corruption the moment men aren't around to ensure their purity. You've got the caste system instead of the system of varnas and ashrams. And you've got intimations of a primitive culture where there is some form of ritualized ancestor worship, and God forbid that should stop, because then the ancestors will suffer. So let's take a closer look at this. The phrase intermixture of caste translates the Sanskrit phrase Varna Sankara. So Varna, the system of Varnas, is what's being spoken about here, but it's being transposed into the modern day caste system, which is, as I explained, what it is not. The translation also makes it appear, therefore, that the Bhagavad-gita is a defense, wants to uphold this caste system, which we hold in low regard for very good reasons. So this is a misleading translation. All right, now let's look at a different translation. And I will thank Christina for reminding me about this translation. This is Juan Mascaro's translation from the Penguin Classics edition. When unrighteous disorder prevails, the women sin and are impure. And when women are not pure, Krishna, there is disorder of castes, social confusion, and this disorder carries down to hell the family and the destroyers of the family. The spirits of their dead suffer in pain when deprived of the ritual offerings. So, no pressure, no judgment, ladies. It's up to you. Stay pure, or we're all going to hell. This is not actually what these verses mean. I will offer you a different translation that I think is more accurate and keeping with the feeling and intention of what Arjuna is trying to say. O Krishna, if righteousness wanes, then women will be exploited. When unscrupulous men exploit women, then unstable children are born into the world, O descendant of Vrishni. The rise of an unstable population results in a hellish life for both families and those who destroy the continuity of families. Even ancestors of such corrupt families fall as sacrificial offerings to honor them cease. Now, this to me makes a lot more sense, because we know from the entertainment industry, the USA gymnastics team, to the molester in chief, that the world is full of unrighteous men anxious to exploit vulnerable women. And when that happens, society can go off the rails. One who is responsible for the breakdown of the family is responsible for a larger social breakdown. And in modern life, we also have the experience that elders of society, the wise grandmothers who stay at home and offer wisdom to the family, the wise men who offer wisdom to society, are not honored are forgotten about in our fast-moving, youth-oriented society. So this is what Arjuna was afraid would happen, and he was right. It has happened. The breakdown of this system has resulted in precisely what Arjuna feared. Which brings us specifically to women in Vedic culture. In Vedic culture, women had equal access to education, and once again, education according to Varna, freedom of speech, and self-determination. If you look at the Mahabharata, we're particularly looking at Kshatriya women, so the warrior class, and you can see how they exercised a tremendous amount of free will and authority in determining the course of events. There is an overt patriarchal social control in the Vedic system, and a very covert matriarchal social control, and balanced marital responsibilities. For the Vaishyas, which is the only Varna that's actually involved in generating money, they're responsible for the economic development of the whole society. And for the Shudras, who perform the labor and are obviously compensated for their work, the husband is seen as the CEO, but the wife is seen as the chief financial officer, which is to say, husbands make money and the wives decide how it's going to get spent. The principle, now I'm going to give you a quote. The principle is the husband honestly tries to earn a livelihood, and the wife should be so intelligent that whatever money the husband earns, she'll manage. So it's assumed that the woman is an intelligent chief financial officer. This quote comes from A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada from a conversation in 1976. Srila Prabhupada is the author of Bhagavad-gita as it is, and a leading authority on the implementation of Vedic culture in modern society. What does Krishna have to say about women? Well, here's the verse, and it's a half a verse from the 10th chapter. So we will chant just half a verse today. I will chant, and you will chant back. Kirti Shrir Vakcha Narinam. I'm going to do it again because I messed it up. Kirti Shrir Vakcha Narinam. Smritir Medha Dhriti Kshama. All right, I messed up the same word twice, but I'm not going to do it again. In describing his own opulences, Krishna says, among women, I am fame, fortune, fine speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and patience. These are qualities that, from Krishna's point of view, are likely to be found in women, or that women identify with and aspire to. So what do we mean when we say intelligence? Interestingly, in this verse, medha is the word used for intelligence. Elsewhere in the Bhagavad-gita, we find the word buddhi used for intelligence. So this implies that there is more than one kind of intelligence. And we're not talking about IQs. We're talking about different qualities of intelligence. So we find that people have different qualities of intelligence. Equal does not mean the same. So one can have equal intelligence, but that intelligence may not operate the same way. Down the rabbit hole we go. I'm going to speak a little bit about general essential natures in men and women, knowing full well that this is not some monolithic dharma, some unchangeable essential nature that all people must conform to. Remember in the beginning, I spoke about how there's a balance between very generalized sense of essential natures and very specific personal essential natures. And as we will see later in the Gita, one must act according to their nature and should not try to repress their nature. So as I go through these general essential natures, I want to be clear that I'm not talking about a very specific formulaic kind of fundamentalism that dictates adherence to very specific essentialist roles for the sake of upholding social order. It's not like that. So, women are psychophysically affected by cycles of nature, have, generally speaking, an attachment to children and stability. The children come directly from their bodies. Naturally, one would expect a strong attachment. And knowing this, women are more inclined to make sure that they have a stable situation for family life. And as a general rule, are more in tune with their emotional intelligence than men are. General essential natures of men, psychophysically, we're kind of indifferent to nature cycles. We do have a very strong attachment to our own egos. And we tend to be more in tune with rational intelligence, by which I mean listening and talking about a problem is not how we solve problems, not part of the solution for men as a general rule. We hear there's a problem, we fix the problem, end of story. It took a long time for me to learn that that really didn't apply in all cases. Okay, one of the strengths of women is that women can embrace masculine qualities. And one of the weaknesses of men is that men tend to be reluctant to develop their feminine qualities. They consider it a sign of weakness. And they feel threatened by the masculine qualities that women may develop in order to do the needful in the world. This is not explicitly stated in the Bhagavad-gita. However, we see this as a throughout the Vedic culture described in the Mahabharata, in which the Bhagavad-gita appears. When men and women get together, you get expansion. It can be the expansion of all the excellent qualities that women embody, according to Krishna's description of women I am. It can be an expansion of one's material life. Men and women get together, then you have children. Now you got to have a house. Now you got to get jobs. Now you have to have money. Now you have more children. Now you have in-laws, and you know your whole material life expands. Your engagement with society expands. Whereas when men and women are apart from one another, then renunciation of the world takes place. One of the topics of the Bhagavad-gita is renunciation, and one of the things that Krishna goes to some lengths to explain to us is the proper understanding of renunciation. Does it mean walking away from the world? Does it mean living in the world without attachment to the world? What precisely is proper renunciation, appropriate renunciation, according to your particular natural inclination, your nature? Not everyone has the same nature, therefore not everyone is going to have the same kind of renunciation. This is a personalist philosophy that balances these generalized essential natures with individualized essential natures. And so renunciation will not be the same for everyone. Now, Arjuna's attempts at expansion have basically failed. He's supposed to be a king inheriting a kingdom, or he's got a wife, he's got kids, he's supposed to be expanding, and his expansion program is just not working out. As we move into the second chapter, we will see that he's thinking about walking away from the whole thing. He's got some conception of renunciation that he suggests to Krishna as he expresses his confusion as to what he should do next. And that's the fifth reason for his not fighting, is he's so confused, he doesn't know what to do. Krishna to the rescue. As we begin the second chapter, we will hear Krishna's first instruction in order to help Arjuna basically get his head screwed on straight. So next week, chapter 2, part 1, attachment and illusion. And that is when we will come back to this idea of family attachment and why that's a problem for Arjuna. We'll hear Krishna's rebuke. We will hear Arjuna express his confusion. And then Arjuna's surrender to Krishna, asking for guidance. It's basically, Arjuna needs a 12-step program. You know, everything is out of his control. He doesn't know what to do. He needs help. And Krishna will then begin his instructions. So tonight's program, we talked about the social order of Arjuna's world, the depiction of women, and the assumption of a patriarchal orientation and how that works. So you have a context, social context for the Gita, and we are now going to move into detachment from family affection and as we move into the second chapter next week. Any questions? I've got the question bar up. I'm sitting on the edge of my seat, waiting to hear how this all sat with you. You know, it doesn't have to be a question. You can also make it a comment. We accept comments here. If you have a question, you're welcome, Susan. My pleasure. If you know you're going to have a question, you don't have one right now, but there's just got to be a question, then you can send it to me after the fact at Hari-kirtana.com. I feel a question. Because I'm mystically connected to the internet, I just feel that there's a question out there. And all someone needs is a second to type up the question. But meanwhile, here are some other resources. If you Google search gender roles in the Mahabharata, you'll find all kinds of stuff come up. Or you can also search strong female characters in the Mahabharata. This book, Gender and Narrative in the Mahabharata, for those of you who are academically inclined, may be an interesting look into the gender dynamics, the power dynamics associated with gender in the Mahabharata, and that will give some additional background as to what's going on in the Bhagavad-gita. I got your question, coming right back. There's a really nice essay on Medium by Chris Cortinados. I left out the R in his name. Chris, I apologize. It's Cortinados, and it's called The Complete Man. And so if you go to Medium, or if you just search The Complete Man, Chris Cortinados, or medium.com, you will also find this graphic there. It's a really nice essay about what I spoke about with regard to the strength of women and the weakness of men, and some nice insights into the problems that's causing for us now. My book has a chapter called the socioeconomic system of yoga. And it talks about the system in Varnas and Ashrams. Now, just in case you would rather not purchase it on Amazon, you can support your local bookstore, your local mom and pop brick and mortar bookstore by going to indiebound.org and finding an affiliate store that will order through IndieBound. And that way you can still just order it online. Same, you know, simplicity and ease of purchasing experience, but you can order it through your favorite local bookstore and that way support a local business, which, by the way, is part of the socioeconomic system of yoga. It's a very local economy. So there you go. Okay, Neil wants to know, so with the qualities discussed about men and women, isn't it that these qualities have become mixed and aren't exactly clear? And in that case, how to proceed? Yes. Clearly, we do not have the same kind of highly defined essential qualities in men and women that some people would like to believe are just the way it's supposed to be. Regardless of how mixed one's nature is. And this is why I emphasized that this is not some kind of formulaic fundamentalism that demands that people who are in a male body but don't have the essential qualities that men are supposed to have, or that someone is in a woman's body but doesn't have the essential female qualities that they're supposed to have. You know, that's not what this is. There's a lot more fluidity here because you have the balance between your own personal nature and a general essential nature. And in some cases, one may not be like that essential nature at all. You know, and this is one reason why I have good friends who totally bristle at the idea of any kind of assertion of any kind of essentialist nature. So if one doesn't fit neatly into a particular category, how does one proceed? You proceed according to your nature. You dovetail whatever your natural inclination for work and interest is, whatever is your nature, you use that, you go with that in the course of the overarching objective of a spiritually oriented society, which is the spiritual advancement of each individual. And you find your way to contribute to the spiritual advancement of society as a whole. And that means that that operates on the assumption that you have a inclusive society, that you have a society where it's a house that everyone can live in. And there's a room in the house for everyone. And a spiritual society has a place for everyone in that society and does not insist that everyone must adhere to some predetermined essentialist role in that society if that role is not a good fit for that individual. That's my take on that. Hold on, next week. Will next week cover through a particular verse in chapter 2? Yes, I'm so glad you asked, Jessica. We will go from verse 1 to 12. Can you restate the difference between Medha and Buddhi? Buddhi is usually described as long-term goal-directed intelligence, or more specifically in the case of the Gita, the ability to distinguish between spirit and matter. I cannot give you a good definition of Medha tonight because I could not find a very specific definition of what kind of intelligence are we talking about when we talk about Medha. But I have a note that I need to find that specific definition so I can make that distinction more clearly. So I will confer with sources of Sanskrit scholarship and get back to you and see what I come up with. But thank you for asking that question and noticing, pointing out how I didn't exactly do that. Okay, Asia. Given the lack of specialized training of individuals, having a natural inclination towards Brahmins or being spiritually enlightened individual, is renunciation a fair option? I want to make sure I understand your question. Okay, I think I do. It depends on what kind of renunciation you're talking about. In other words, since there are practically no Brahmins in society anymore, then the idea of turning one's back on the world, going off to the forest or living in a cave, very rare that anyone can do that successfully. Very few people have that kind of training, that kind of aptitude, that level of detachment from the world. For most of us, we can get spiritual training that encourages us to adopt a different kind of renunciation. And it's still Brahminical. So it's not necessarily that Brahmin means in the modern world that you go off to the forest or you wander from village to village. Brahminical means being in the mode of goodness. And I'm going to talk more about these modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance, the three gunas, coming up a little ways down the line. The real issue here is what kind of renunciation is appropriate for someone with a spiritual inclination or a inclination in one of the other varnas, and how do they crosstalk? Can someone who is an artist also be a Brahmin? We'll explore that as well. Thank you very much for your question. All right, we've run a little bit over. I thank you very much for staying with our program this evening, for all of you. It's a great pleasure and an honor as always. I'm looking forward to your questions. After the fact, please feel free to write me, hari@harikirtan.com, and I will endeavor to respond to you as quickly as possible. Thank you, Neela Madhava. Back at you. All right, Jessica, thank you. Thank you, all of you, very much for being here this evening. And I look forward to seeing you all again